Hey guys, tonight we're going way back. Further than your grandpa's stories, further than ancient Rome, further even than the dinosaurs. We're peeling back the layers of Earth itself, right to its fiery, chaotic birth. Imagine, if you will, standing on a precipice, not of rock, but of time itself, gazing out at a landscape that Dante himself would have called a bit much. You see a roiling, incandescent ocean of molten rock stretching to a hazy, sulphurous horizon. The sky above isn't blue or even cloudy as you know it. It's a bruised, angry canvas, constantly lit by the streaks of incoming meteorites, big and small, a cosmic game of pinball where our baby Earth is the unfortunate machine. There's no gentle lapping of waves, just the violent surge and hiss of lava. The ground beneath your imaginary feet trembling with the planet's birth pangs. If you were somehow teleported there, your bespoke, very expensive vacation package would last about a microsecond. Probably less, to be honest. You'd be more of a brief, surprised puff of vapor than a tourist. It's the Hadean Eon, and it's about as welcoming as a tax audit conducted by a very grumpy badger. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're at it, maybe drop your location and local time in the comments below. It's always fascinating to see where everyone is tuning in from as we collectively try to ignore our responsibilities and drift off. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself adrift, a silent observer in the pre-dawn of our world some 4.5 billion years ago. The very term Hadean conjures images of the underworld, and for good reason. It's a time named after Hades, the Greek god of the dead and the subterranean realm, and frankly, he'd probably feel right at home here. There's no solid ground to speak of, not in any stable sense. The Earth is a glowing orb of magma, a planet-sized foundry relentlessly bombarded by the leftover debris of the solar system's formation. Think of the solar system as a construction site, and young Earth is that bit of ground where all the extra bricks, cosmic rubble, and forgotten celestial cement mixers end up. The story of Earth's beginning is one of cosmic accretion. Out in the swirling disk of gas and dust known as the solar nebula, tiny particles began to stick together. Electrostatic forces, like a sock clinging to you after a tumble in the dryer, pulled them into larger clumps. These clumps grew into planetesimals, small celestial bodies, which then collided and merged over millions of years, eventually forming the planets we know today, including our own. It was less a gentle assembly and more of a demolition derby in space, with Earth slowly but surely growing larger with each cataclysmic impact. And speaking of impacts, the most significant event of this early period, a mainstream scientific theory so widely accepted it's practically Earth's official birth story, is the formation of our moon. Imagine our young, molten Earth, still reeling from its formation, when a rogue protoplanet, roughly the size of Mars, an object astronomers have cheekily named Theia, delivers a staggering, glancing blow. The energy of this collision is almost incomprehensible. A significant portion of Earth's mantle and Theia itself are vaporized and flung into orbit, a colossal spray of superheated rock and gas. Over time, this ring of debris coalesces, pulled together by gravity, to form our moon. So, when you look up at that familiar silver disk in the night sky, remember it's a child of unimaginable violence, a constant reminder of Earth's truly tumultuous toddler years. The atmosphere around you, if you could even call it that, is a toxic, suffocating brew. Any primordial atmosphere Earth might have had, perhaps hydrogen and helium captured from the solar nebula, was likely blasted away by intense solar winds from the young sun or stripped by these colossal impacts. What remains, and what's currently being belched out by every volcanic fissure and magma plume, is a secondary atmosphere. Think water vapor, carbon dioxide, methane, ammonia, sulfur dioxide. A charming cocktail, really. Noticeably absent is free oxygen. That particular life-giving gas is still billions of years in the future, so no deep breaths here, unless you're looking for a particularly inventive way to cease existing. The sun itself is a bit of a puzzle during this period. Researchers still argue whether the early sun was significantly fainter, perhaps only 70% as luminous as it is today. This is known as the faint young sun paradox. Because if the sun were that much cooler, Earth's surface might have frozen solid, even with all its internal heat. Yet evidence suggests there was liquid water relatively early on. The likely solution, an incredibly potent greenhouse effect,
far more strong than anything we've read about today, with all that carbon dioxide and methane trapping every bit of available heat, keeping the surface a simmering, if not entirely molten, nursery. And what of water? The very essence of life as we know it. Where did it come from on this infernal skier? Much of it was likely cooked out of the rocks themselves, released as steam from the endless volcanic activity. As the planet began its incredibly slow cooling process, this steam would condense, leading to the first rains. Picture it, not gentle showers, but a torrential, planet-wide deluge falling on a surface still blisteringly hot, hissing and steaming, perhaps for centuries, even millennia. Other significant contributions of water, and complex organic molecules for that matter, likely came from the sky, delivered by comets and asteroids, icy voyagers from the outer solar system, continuing to pummel the Earth even as it tried to cool. These impacts, while destructive, also sowed the seeds for a different future. The early oceans, once they started to accumulate, wouldn't have been the azure expanses you dream of for a beach holiday. They were likely hot, acidic, and because of a high concentration of dissolved iron, perhaps a murky, unsettling green. No lifeguards on duty, naturally, and the sharks hadn't even bothered to evolve yet. Talk about a missed opportunity for early beachfront property developers, though the beachfronts themselves were rather mobile given the circumstances. Slowly, painstakingly, the Earth begins to radiate its primordial heat into space. The magma ocean starts to cool from the top down, like a cosmic creme brulee, forming the first semblance of a crust. This crust wouldn't be the stable continental landmasses you're familiar with. It was likely thin, basaltic in composition, similar to modern oceanic crust, and constantly being broken apart, subducted, and reformed by meteorite impacts and the planet's still fierce internal volcanism. Imagine tectonic plates on overdrive before they even properly existed as distinct plates. Yet in this chaos, the first hints of differentiation were occurring. Lighter materials, separating from the denser iron and nickel sinking to form the core, began to accumulate, perhaps forming the very first tiny, ephemeral protocontinents, or cratons, small islands of slightly more stable rock in a sea of fire. Here's a little something to ponder as you drift in this Hadean dreamscape. What if, in this incredibly hostile, yet chemically rich environment, the very first, extremely simple self-replicating chemical structures flickered into existence, only to be snuffed out by the next asteroid impact or lava flow? This is a quirky, fringe tidbit for you, the idea of lost genesis events. Perhaps life, or something very much like its earliest precursor, tried to get a foothold not just once, but multiple times, in sheltered pockets, before the conditions were stable enough for it to truly take root and persist. We search for one origin of life, but what if there were several failed auditions before the main show? It's a humbling thought that the story of life might have unseen, utterly erased prologues. The Hadean Eon, despite its name, wasn't just an ending for Thea or a bad time for real estate, it was a crucible, forging a planet that would, eventually, be capable of harboring stories. And if you were an immortal observer with a very, very patient disposition, you'd be watching the universe's most elaborate stage being set. You'd probably need a few eons worth of snacks, too. This show was just getting started, and the intermission was still a few billion years away.
The cosmic fireworks display you witnessed in Earth's Hadean youth is starting to subside, just a little. The relentless rain of city-sized asteroids lessens to a mere shower of county-sized ones, and the planet, our very own celestial cannonball, has managed to radiate some of its initial furious heat out into the cold vacuum of space. Remember those first tentative oceans you saw forming? They're still scalding hot, probably acidic enough to dissolve your hypothetical space boots in seconds, and a rather unappetizing shade of murky green or rusty red, depending on the local geochemistry. But they exist. And the surface, while still a patchwork of volcanic hotspots and newly solidified, fragile crust, is marginally less like the inside of a blast furnace. The stage, though still primitive and frankly quite dangerous, is slowly being set for an entirely new kind of drama, one that unfolds not with thunderous explosions, but with the quietest, most subtle of flickers, the emergence of life.
You're now drifting into a period where the Earth is still incredibly alien, yet the first whispers of biology are about to stir. The central mystery we're tiptoeing around is abiogenesis, a rather fancy term for life springing forth from non-living matter. It's the ultimate cosmic magic trick, turning simple chemistry into complex biology. And it's a puzzle that scientists are still piecing together with painstaking effort. Imagine that early ocean, no longer just water and dissolved minerals, but a vast planetary chemical laboratory. This is the heart of the primordial soup theory, first proposed by Oparin and Haldane. They envisioned these early waters, rich in simple organic compounds formed by lightning, volcanic activity, and UV radiation, gradually self-assembling into more complex molecules. It's not exactly your grandmother's restorative chicken soup, unless your grandmother was a particularly adventurous chemist with a penchant for ammonia and methane. The conditions were, shall we say, robust. To test these ideas, the mainstream scientific experiment known as the Miller-Urey experiment, conducted in 1952, tried to replicate these early Earth conditions. Stanley Miller and Harold Urey zapped mixture of water, methane, ammonia, and hydrogen with electrical sparks, simulating lightning, and lo and behold, they managed to create amino acids, the fundamental building blocks of proteins. It was a landmark result, proving that complex organic molecules could indeed form spontaneously under such conditions. Of course, producing a few amino acids is a far cry from creating even the simplest living cell. Like finding a few Lego bricks is a long way from building a fully functional Millennium Falcon. But it was a crucial first step, a proof of concept that the universe wasn't entirely opposed to the idea of life. But where, in this tumultuous world, could such a delicate process actually take hold? One leading candidate takes you far from the sunlit surface, deep beneath the waves, to hydrothermal vents. Picture these chimney-like structures on the ocean floor, spewing out superheated, mineral-rich water from Earth's interior. Around these black smokers, or white smokers, you find an oasis of chemical energy in the crushing darkness of the deep sea. These environments would have been shielded from harsh UV radiation and constant meteorite impacts that plagued the surface. The chemical gradients here, the flow of energy, could have provided the perfect crucible for life's first tentative experiments. You can almost imagine the scene: absolute blackness, immense pressure, plumes of what looks like smoke but is actually superheated water laden with dissolved minerals, and all around the silent, patient dance of molecules. Alternatively, perhaps life preferred a room with a view. Charles Darwin famously mused about a warm little pond, where chemicals could concentrate through cycles of wetting and drying powered by sunlight. Shallow pools, lagoons, or even damp volcanic landscapes could have been these nurseries. Here, UV radiation, while potentially destructive, also provided energy for chemical reactions. Researchers still argue whether life had a single, specific point of origin, perhaps in these deep-sea vents or sun-drenched pools, or if there were multiple near starts in various environments across the early Earth, each a little local experiment in self-organization. It's a bit like wondering if that perfect recipe for a new dish was invented in one specific kitchen, or if similar ideas were bubbling away in several places at once. Now, even if you have the building blocks and a suitable location, how do you get them to actually do something that resembles life? One of the big puzzles is the chicken and egg problem of DNA and proteins. DNA holds the instructions for building proteins, but you need proteins, enzymes, to replicate DNA. So, which came first? Enter the RNA world hypothesis. RNA, a simpler cousin of DNA, is a bit of a molecular jack-of-all-trades. It can store genetic information like DNA, and it can catalyze chemical reactions like proteins in the form of ribozymes. You can imagine a world where these RNA molecules were the main players, replicating, mutating, competing, and evolving within those primordial soups or vent systems. Tiny, ephemeral molecular dramas playing out on a scale so small you'd need an impossible microscope to witness them. Yet their consequences would eventually rewrite the future of the entire planet. From these self-replicating molecules, it's another giant leap to the first true cells. This involves encapsulating the genetic material and cellular machinery within a membrane, creating a distinct little us versus them on a chemical level. This leads us to the concept of LUCA, the last universal common ancestor. LUCA wasn't the very first life form, but rather the most recent organism from which all life on Earth, as we know it today, has descended. If you trace your family tree back far enough and then keep going, past mammals, past reptiles, past fish, past insects, all the way back through the mists of deep time, you'd eventually arrive at this humble microbial ancestor. LUCA was likely a relatively simple, single-celled prokaryote, probably anaerobic, thriving in the absence of oxygen, which was still scarce, and quite possibly thermophilic, meaning it liked it hot, a sensible preference given the still toasty conditions of early Earth. It wouldn't win any beauty contests, but it was a survivor. These earliest microbes, these unseen architects of our planet, were not the kind of creatures that inspire epic poems. They were just quietly, diligently going about their business of existing, metabolizing, and reproducing. They wouldn't find them posting selfies or complaining about their day. They were too busy laying the biochemical foundations for all subsequent evolution. Many of them were likely extremophiles, organisms that flourish in conditions that would kill most modern life forms: extreme heat, cold, acidity, pressure, or salinity. Modern extremophiles, found in places like volcanic hot springs or deep-sea vents, give us a glimpse into what these ancient pioneers might have been like. They probably wouldn't appreciate a gentle spa day. The carefully balanced pH of your fancy mineral water would be terribly unsettling for them. Now, for a slightly different flavor of speculation, a quirky fringe tidbit to mull over as you drift: the theory of panspermia. This idea proposes that life didn't actually originate on Earth at all, but was delivered here from somewhere else in the cosmos, perhaps as hardy microbial spores hitchhiking on meteorites or comets ejected from another life-bearing planet, maybe even Mars in its wetter youth. This doesn't solve the ultimate riddle of abiogenesis, of course. It just relocates the laboratory. But it does open up the rather mind-bending possibility that we are all, in a sense, extraterrestrials. So Earth essentially got life as a kind of cosmic care package, or maybe a slightly used hand-me-down from a neighboring solar system that was decluttering. It's an intriguing thought, isn't it? Another, more terrestrial, but still quite speculative idea suggests that life might have first organized itself within the microscopic layers of clay minerals, which could have provided a scaffold for concentrating and organizing organic molecules, a sort of mineral matchmaker for the components of life. As you ponder these immense questions, feel the sheer scale of time involved. This wasn't a rapid invention. It was likely a hesitant, stuttering process, full of countless failed experiments, unfolding over hundreds of millions of years. The first spark of life was not a sudden flash, but perhaps a slow, smoldering ember, finally catching hold in some sheltered nook of a violent young world, a testament to the universe's quiet insistence on complexity. So that tiny, hesitant spark of life we talked about, the one that somehow flickered into existence against all odds in Earth's turbulent youth, well, it didn't just fizzle out, it caught. And for an almost incomprehensibly long time, for literally billions of years, these first simple life forms, these microscopic pioneers, would be the undisputed rulers of the planet. You're now drifting into the Archean Eon, a vast stretch of time where the Earth, though still a far cry from the blue marble we know, is gradually settling down. The oceans are vast. The volcanic activity, while still impressive, is less world-endingly frantic, and the atmosphere is still a cocktail of gases you wouldn't want to bottle as a souvenir, notably still lacking in free oxygen. Imagine a world populated exclusively by prokaryotes, bacteria and their equally ancient cousins, archaea. No trees, No flowers, not birdsong, not even a humble worm. Just these single-celled organisms, trillions upon trillions of them, inhabiting the oceans, the shallow pools, even the pores of rocks. Their simplicity is their superpower. They reproduce quickly, adapt readily, and have a collective biochemical toolkit that would make a modern pharmaceutical company green with envy. They are the silent, invisible emperors of this ancient earth, quietly going about their business, shaping the planet in ways they could never comprehend. It's a dominion not of muscle or might, but of sheer numbers and relentless, patient chemistry. If you were to look for visible signs of this microbial empire, you might find yourself wading through the warm, shallow waters along some primordial coastline. Here, you might encounter stromatolites. These are layered, dome-like, or columnar structures, often described as living rocks, some of the earliest mainstream scientific evidence we have of life on Earth, with fossil examples dating back over 3.5 billion years. Picture them, built slowly, painstakingly, by communities of microorganisms, particularly cyanobacteria. These microbes form sticky mats that trap sediment particles. Then they grow up through the sediment to catch the sunlight, forming another layer and so on for millennia. They are, in essence, microbial cities, the first large-scale constructions built by life. The zoning laws were probably very relaxed back then, with prime beachfront property going to whichever biofilm could stick the hardest. The water around them is warm, perhaps a bit salty, with the faint, earthy scent of microbial processes, a far cry from the sulfurous tang of the earlier Hadean. Now, these early life forms needed energy, just like us. The very first ones were likely chemosynthesizers, drawing energy from chemical reactions in their environment, like those around hydrothermal vents. Others might have been simple heterotrophs, scavenging organic molecules from the primordial soup. But the real revolution, the one that would eventually pave the way for, well, us, was the evolution of photosynthesis. At first, it was anoxygenic photosynthesis, using sunlight to create energy, but not producing oxygen as a byproduct. Think of purple sulfur bacteria, using hydrogen sulfide, that rotten egg smell, instead of water as an electron donor, painting certain aquatic environments in vivid, strange hues. But then came the true game changer, oxygenic photosynthesis, mastered by a group of bacteria called cyanobacteria, sometimes known as blue-green algae. These remarkable little cells figured out how to split water molecules using sunlight, releasing that incredibly reactive gas, oxygen, as a waste product. You can almost imagine the scene, tiny, unassuming green specks in the water, quietly performing this miracle of biochemistry, and with each microscopic exhalation, releasing the first tiny bubbles of free oxygen into a world that had never known it. They were, without any grand pronouncements, beginning to terraform the entire planet. For a very long time, perhaps hundreds of millions of years, this newly produced oxygen didn't really build up in the atmosphere. Instead, it reacted with the abundant dissolved iron in Earth's oceans. As this oxygen rusted the iron, it precipitated out of the seawater, settling in layers on the ocean floor. This process created vast geological formations known as banded iron formations, or BIFs, striking rust-red and dark gray striped rocks that serve as a dramatic geological record of this planetary oxygenation. You can still find massive deposits of BIFs today. They're the source of most of our iron ore. Essentially, the planet was one giant, slow-motion rust experiment. Once most of the reactive minerals in the oceans, like that iron, were oxidized, once the Earth's rust bucket was full, so to speak, oxygen finally began to accumulate in the atmosphere. This is known as the Great Oxidation Event, or sometimes, more dramatically, the oxygen catastrophe. Around 2.4 billion years ago, the atmospheric oxygen level started to climb significantly. For the anaerobic life forms that had dominated Earth until then, this was an environmental crisis of unparalleled proportions. Oxygen was a poison to them, a corrosive, highly reactive gas that wrecked their cellular machinery. It was basically the first major pollution event, except the pollutant was, the stuff we now spend our entire lives desperately trying to breathe. Talk about a plot twist with serious irony. Life, as it always does, found ways to cope. Many anaerobic organisms retreated into oxygen-poor environments, deep ocean sediments, stagnant anoxic waters, or even inside other organisms. They're still there today, these relics of an earlier Earth. Other microbes evolved ingenious defenses against oxygen, developing antioxidant enzymes. And some went even further, evolving a way to use oxygen, aerobic respiration. This new biochemical pathway was vastly more efficient at extracting energy from organic molecules than anaerobic pathways. It was like upgrading from a sputtering single-cylinder engine to a finely tuned V8. This biochemical innovation, born out of a crisis, would unlock the door for the evolution of larger, more complex, and more energy-hungry life forms much, much later. The reign of these ancient microbes, lasting for eons, was a period of incredible, though largely invisible, biochemical innovation. They invented fermentation, photosynthesis, nitrogen fixation, and countless other metabolic tricks that still underpin the entire biosphere today. It's a humbling thought that these tiny, seemingly simple organisms were the true pioneers, the ones who figured out all the essential chemical pathways for life. Now, for a little speculative journey into the truly forbidden side of this ancient history, consider the quirky, fringe tidbit of a shadow biosphere. What if, alongside the familiar DNA-RNA-based life that led to us, other, entirely different forms of life also arose on early Earth, perhaps based on different solvents than water, or different genetic polymers? Could such life forms, biochemically alien to us, still persist in some hidden niche, undetected by our current scientific methods because we simply don't know what to look for? It's a wild idea, but it tickles the imagination. Or perhaps, less out there, but equally profound, was the sheer scale of horizontal gene transfer during this microbial era. Instead of just passing genes down to their offspring, these microbes were constantly swapping genetic code amongst themselves, like a planet-wide open-source software project. It's like instead of every microbe laboriously inventing the wheel, once one did, the plans got shared with everyone almost instantly. This would have dramatically accelerated early evolution, allowing for rapid adaptation and the spread of new biochemical inventions. Even with all we've learned, scientists still debate the exact timing and pace of the Great Oxygen Event, particularly how it interacted with other major Earth system changes, such as the snowball Earth glaciations, periods when the entire planet may have been covered in ice. Did the rise of oxygen trigger these deep freezes, or did it help to end them? And how did the very first eukaryotes, cells with a complex internal structure, including a nucleus, the lineage that would eventually lead to fungi, plants, and animals like us, begin to evolve in this changing, oxygenating world? The details are still being pieced together from faint chemical signatures in ancient rocks and the genetic echoes within modern life. As you float through this immense, deep past, the age of microbes, let the sheer scale of it all seep into your awareness. Billions of years. Not much happening that you could see with your naked eye, beyond the slow creep of stromatolites or perhaps a change in the color of the water. Yet beneath that apparent stillness, the world was being fundamentally, irrevocably transformed by its smallest inhabitants, setting the stage for every subsequent chapter in Earth's long and often forbidden history. The silence of this dawn is profound, but it's the silence of a world hard at work, patiently building a future.
You've witnessed the Earth transform from a molten hellscape to a microbial nursery, and then to a planet where tiny oxygen-producing bacteria fundamentally rewrote the atmospheric script.
This Great Oxidation Event, as dramatic as it sounds, ushered in a new, incredibly long chapter in Earth's story, a significant portion of the Proterozoic Eon. Now, for a good stretch of this time, roughly from about 1.8 billion to 800 million years ago, geologists and paleontologists have often referred to this period with a rather unflattering nickname, the Boring Billion. Sometimes it's even called the Barren Billion, or Earth's Middle Ages. It certainly doesn't sound like a highlight reel, does it? The name conjures up images of a planet stuck in cosmic neutral, a billion years where nothing much happened. And on the surface, or at least from the perspective of easily read fossil records and dramatic geological upheavals, there seemed to be some truth to that. Oxygen levels in the atmosphere after their initial rise appeared to stabilize at levels much lower than today, but they were present. The climate, too, was thought to be relatively stable, perhaps even a bit dull compared to the fiery beginnings or the icy snowball Earth episodes that would bookend this era. Evolutionary innovation, particularly in terms of large, complex life, seemed to be on a long, slow simmer, almost as if life had hit a snooze button after the excitement of inventing oxygen. It sounds like the geological equivalent of a really long, incredibly uninteresting Tuesday afternoon, where the clock on the wall just refuses to move. But tonight, as you drift through this supposed yawn in Earth's history, we're going to gently question that boring label. Was it truly a billion years of planetary ennui, or is this illusion of boring more a reflection of our own incomplete understanding? A period whose subtle intrigues we're only now beginning to appreciate. Think of it like an old black-and-white photograph you've seen 1,000 times. You assume it's just a static, uninteresting scene, until someone with new technology or a fresh perspective reveals hidden details, subtle colors, and a depth you never noticed before. That's what modern science is starting to do with the boring billion. One of the most significant, though admittedly not flashy developments that was well underway during and leading into this period, was the rise and diversification of eukaryotes. This is a mainstream scientific understanding and a crucial step in the story of life. Remember those simple prokaryotic cells, the bacteria and archaea that ruled the early Earth? Well, eukaryotic cells are a major upgrade. They possess a true nucleus to house their DNA, and a suite of specialized internal compartments called organelles, like tiny organs within the cell, each with a specific job. The leading theory for how some of these organelles came to be is endosymbiosis. Imagine one prokaryotic cell engulfing another, but instead of digesting it, the two formed a permanent partnership. Mitochondria, the powerhouses of eukaryotic cells, are thought to be descendants of once free-living bacteria that were masters of aerobic respiration. Similarly, chloroplasts, the sites of photosynthesis in plant and algal cells, likely originated from engulfed cyanobacteria. It was the ultimate ancient roommate situation, and it worked out beautifully for everyone involved, leading to a much more complex cellular lifestyle. Throughout the boring billion, these new eukaryotic cells, initially all single-celled organisms like various kinds of protists and algae, were slowly, quietly evolving and diversifying in the world's oceans. They weren't building empires or leaving behind giant fossils, but they were experimenting with new ways of living, new cellular structures, and new biochemical pathways. This was the era where the fundamental toolkit for more complex life was being assembled, piece by painstaking piece. You might find yourself drifting over vast, sunlit expanses of ocean, tinted faintly green or reddish-brown by countless trillions of these microscopic algae, the true, if very understated, protagonists of this eon. And what about the planet itself? Was it geologically snoozing too? Not entirely. This period saw the assembly and eventual breakup of early supercontinents. Names like Columbia, also known as Nuna, and later Rodinia, might not roll off the tongue like Pangaea, but their formation and rifting involved immense tectonic forces, shaping ocean basins and potentially influencing global climate and ocean chemistry in subtle but important ways. The movement of these vast land masses, even if slow by human standards, would have altered ocean currents, nutrient runoff from land, and the locations of volcanic activity. Researchers still debate the extent of tectonic activity and its impact on nutrient availability during the boring billion, and whether a prolonged period of relative tectonic quietness might have limited the supply of essential trace metals like molybdenum or phosphorus, thereby acting as a sort of environmental brake on further biological innovation. So, while large, complex animals hadn't yet made their grand entrance, were there any early experiments in multicellularity? The evidence is tantalizing, but often ambiguous. The dazzling array of the Ediacaran biota and the subsequent Cambrian explosion were hundreds of millions of years in the future. But some fossil finds, though rare and sometimes controversial, hint at simpler forms of multicellular life emerging during the boring billion. Maybe these were just simple filaments of cells, or small undifferentiated clumps, not much more than a loose collective of cooperating eukaryotes. It wasn't exactly a bustling metropolis of cellular life, more like a few small, quiet villages where the cells were just learning the benefits of sticking together, maybe for protection or to better access resources. It's a subtle kind of progress, but progress nonetheless. Now, for a quirky fringe tidbit to sprinkle into this long, quiet eon, what if this apparent stasis wasn't just about a lack of opportunity, but a kind of evolutionary holding pattern? Some scientists speculate that while the genetic and cellular tools for more complex life might have been evolving, certain global environmental conditions, perhaps the precise composition of the atmosphere, the levels of specific trace elements in the ocean, or even pervasive sulfide toxicity in some marine environments, acted as a very effective planetary-scale pause button for large-scale morphological evolution. Life was ready for its next big leap, but the stage wasn't quite set perfectly. Or for a more whimsical and decidedly unscientific thought to lull you to sleep, perhaps this was the era of deep philosophical contemplation for those newly evolved single-cell eukaryotes. Having mastered the art of internal organelles and perhaps even a bit of simple cooperation, what profound thoughts occupied the collective algal mind for 1 billion years? Probably wondering if they left the primordial soup on, or debating the best angle to catch those faint proterozoic sunbeams. So, why the illusion of boring? Several factors likely contribute. Early eukaryotes were mostly soft-bodied, and soft-bodied organisms don't fossilize nearly as well as creatures with hard shells or skeletons. The fossil record is inherently biased towards things that are easily preserved. Furthermore, the sheer immensity of 1 billion years can make even significant slow-moving changes difficult to detect without incredibly detailed and widespread geological and paleontological data. And, let's be honest, science often gravitates towards the more dramatic events, like mass extinctions or explosive radiations of new life forms, sometimes leaving the quieter periods less explored. But as you drift now, imagine this boring billion, not as a period of stagnation, but one of profound, yet incredibly subtle preparation. It was the long, quiet breath the Earth took before the eventual exhale of more complex life to come. The intrigue here is not in grand gestures, but in the almost imperceptible accumulation of potential, a planetary system slowly simmering, patiently laying the groundwork for futures yet undreamed.
We've just drifted through the so-called boring billion, a stretch of Earth's history that, as we've seen, was perhaps more subtly industrious than its nickname suggests. Eukaryotic cells were finding their footing, continents were slowly waltzing across the globe, and the planet was in a long preparatory simmer. Life, for the most part, remains small, microbial, or at best very simple multicellular pond scum. We've been navigating the relatively charted waters of accepted science, albeit from Earth's incredibly distant past. Now, however, with the sheer immensity of geological time stretching out behind us like an endless dark ocean, we're going to dip a toe into more speculative currents. Let your mind unfurl a bit as we ponder a rather intriguing question, one that brushes against the very edges of what we think we know about history and even about ourselves. Tonight, we explore a thought experiment, a what-if scenario so vast it makes most science fiction seem quaint. This is the Silurian hypothesis, a name charmingly borrowed from creatures in Doctor Who, but its proponents are very real scientists: Gavin Schmidt, a climatologist at NASA, and Adam Frank, an astrophysicist. Their hypothesis isn't that ancient lizard people ruled the Earth, but something more profound and unsettling. Could an industrial civilization, or indeed any form of complex, technologically advanced society, have existed on Earth, say, tens or even hundreds of millions of years before human beings ever evolved? And if it did, how on earth would we ever know? This is the quirky, fringe tidbit that forms the heart of our gentle ponderings for this section, a hypothesis less about finding lost cities of gold and more about understanding the deep echoes of existence. The first thing you have to wrestle with is the sheer destructive power of deep time. We humans tend to think our creations are permanent, our cities of steel and concrete, or grand monuments, our digital archives. But pit them against millions of years of geological activity, erosion, sedimentation, subduction as tectonic plates dive back into the mantle, and they become heartbreakingly ephemeral. If our current global industrial civilization were to vanish tomorrow, what tangible evidence would remain in, say, 50 million years or 100 million years? The answer is, depressingly, very little. Our grand concrete jungles would be less than dust, our digital empires utterly forgotten, reduced to scattered molecules. Your prized collection of novelty cat-shaped mugs? Purely theoretical by then, a footnote in a geological layer too thin to spot easily. So if direct evidence like a fossilized factory or a Silurian smartphone is laughably improbable, what kind of indirect signals, what subtle fingerprints might a long-vanished industrial society leave behind in the geological record? This is where the Silurian hypothesis gets really clever. Schmidt and Frank suggest looking for specific geochemical anomalies. Imagine, for instance, unusual spikes in carbon isotopes in ancient sediments. We know from mainstream scientific understanding of events like the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum around 56 million years ago that massive releases of carbon into the atmosphere can leave distinct isotopic signatures. The PTEM is thought to have been caused by natural phenomena like volcanic activity or methane hydrate release, but its chemical fingerprint, a sharp negative carbon isotope excursion, is similar to what we are currently producing by burning fossil fuels. Could such an anomaly in an even older rock layer hint at ancient industry? Or consider the plastics and synthetic pollutants our civilization churns out. Many of these are incredibly persistent. Could trace amounts of uniquely industrial, long-lasting molecules be locked away in ancient rock strata, like a chemical message in a million-year-old bottle? What about unusual concentrations of specific metals, perhaps from mining or smelting on a vast scale? Or even evidence of deliberate fossil fuel depletion in older geological formations, if a previous civilization had also discovered the joys and sorrows of coal or oil. You might even look for sudden, unexplained extinction events in the fossil record. While many extinctions have natural causes, a technologically capable species can certainly throw a spanner in the ecological works. Now, before your imagination runs wild with visions of ancient astronauts or dinosaurian engineers, it's crucial to remember that as of right now, there is no actual evidence to support the existence of such a pre-human industrial civilization. The Silurian hypothesis is primarily a tool to make us think. It forces us to consider what our own geological legacy might be and how future geologists millions of years from now might, or might not, detect our fleeting presence on this planet.
Researchers still debate what specific, unambiguous markers would definitively differentiate a naturally occurring geological anomaly, like the PTEM, from a potential technosignature of a long-vanished industrial civilization. It's a cosmic game of what left that weird stain in the rock. The Earth is an incredibly efficient recycler. Plate tectonics diligently drag old ocean floor and any civilizations built upon it down into the mantle's fiery embrace. Erosion grinds mountains to sand. Life itself colonizes and reclaims. Any signal would be faint, diluted, and easily misinterpreted. Perhaps any such precursor civilization was very different from ours. Maybe their industry was based on biodegradable materials, or they were highly localized, or their tenure was geologically brief, a mere flash in the pan of deep time. It's less about seriously expecting to find Silurians, and more about appreciating the profound humility that comes with confronting the vastness of Earth's unwritten history. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? It's less about they walk among us, and more about did someone leave the cosmic lights on 100 million years ago, and we just missed the memo, or the breaker panel. If such a civilization did exist, you almost have to feel a bit sorry for them, geologically speaking. To have risen, to have built, perhaps to have looked up at the stars with their own unique dreams, and then to be so utterly erased that their entire existence is now just a faint, speculative whisper in a few scientific papers. You have to wonder about their art, their music, their philosophies. If they had reality TV, what would it have been? Pangea's Got Talent, Silurian Shore. The mind boggles. And, thankfully for our sanity, the geological record is mercifully silent on such potential horrors. Ultimately, pondering the Silurian hypothesis is a wonderfully sleepy way to contemplate our own place in the grand, sprawling narrative of Earth. It underscores the almost inconceivable depth of time that has passed, the countless stories that are irrevocably lost, and the sobering thought that our own story, for all its sound and fury, might one day be just as silent, just as deeply buried. As you drift off, imagine the Earth itself as a vast, ancient library where most of the books have long since crumbled to dust, leaving only the faintest scent of their passing, and the occasional, puzzling smudge on a forgotten page.
We've just tiptoed into the rather mind-bending territory of the Silurian hypothesis, pondering whether civilizations might have risen and fallen in the eons before our own, leaving barely a whisper in the geological record. That idea, as speculative as it is, leans heavily on one undeniable truth. Earth's deep history is an incredibly efficient eraser of stories. And this brings us to a more fundamental aspect of our journey into the planet's silent dawn, the very nature of the diary in which these ancient tales are written, or rather, sporadically and incompletely jotted down, the fossil record itself. If the Silurian hypothesis highlights how a complex society might vanish, the fossil record shows us how even the most abundant and ordinary life forms often meet the same fate of utter oblivion. Imagine yourself as a cosmic librarian, tasked with reading the history of life on Earth. You pull out a volume labeled The Story of Life, and as you begin to flip through its pages, you realize with dawning dismay that most of them are missing. Entire chapters are gone, others are smudged and illegible, and some pages only have a single enigmatic word or a faint partial illustration. This is the reality of the fossil record. It is not a complete account. It is a precious yet profoundly fragmented collection of fleeting moments preserved against almost impossible odds. The process of becoming a fossil is in itself a minor miracle. This is mainstream scientific understanding, but it's worth dwelling on. For an organism to even have a chance at being immortalized in rock, a whole cascade of unlikely events needs to occur. First, rapid burial is key. If a creature dies and is left exposed on the surface,
Scavengers, decomposers, and the elements will typically make short work of it. It needs to be quickly covered by sediment, mud, sand, volcanic ash, to be protected from these destructive forces. Think of it like needing to be tucked into a geological bed almost immediately after your final breath. Becoming a fossil is like winning the geological lottery, and most creatures that ever lived didn't even bother to buy a ticket. Or perhaps more accurately, were never in a place where tickets were even being sold. Then there's the matter of what you're made of. Hard parts like bones, teeth, shells, and wood are much more likely to survive long enough to be mineralized. Soft tissues, skin, muscle, organs, usually decay far too quickly. This is why the fossil record is overwhelmingly biased towards creatures with skeletons or shells. It's like trying to reconstruct an entire ancient society based only on their pottery and discarded tools, with very few portraits or written accounts of the people themselves. The science that studies all these processes, everything that happens from an organism's death to its eventual discovery as a fossil, is called taphonomy. It's a kind of geological detective work, figuring out not just what died, but how it lived, died, and what biases might have skewed its chances of ending up in a museum drawer. These inherent difficulties in preservation mean that the fossil record is riddled with gaps, periods where fossils of certain groups, or even of most life forms, are frustratingly scarce. These aren't necessarily times when nothing was happening. More often, they're periods where the conditions for fossilization were poor across large areas, or where the rocks that might have contained those fossils have since been eroded away, metamorphosed beyond recognition, or are buried so deeply we can't access them. A famous example is Roemer's Gap, a period in the early Carboniferous, just after the Devonian extinction, where fossils of early tetrapods, our four-limbed ancestors making their way onto land, are notably rare. We know they were around, but the details of their evolution during these crucial millions of years are hazy. It's like trying to watch a movie, but the projector keeps skipping vital scenes, leaving you to guess how the plot advanced. Yet sometimes, against all odds, the Earth grants us a truly spectacular glimpse into the past. These are sites of exceptional preservation, known to paleontologists as Lagerstätten, a German term meaning storage places. Locations like the Burgess Shale in Canada, dating back to the Cambrian period, or the Solkenhofen limestone in Germany, famous for preserving Archaeopteryx, provide astonishingly detailed fossils. Here, you find not just bones and shells, but sometimes impressions of soft tissues, delicate appendages, even the contents of stomachs. These Lagerstätten are like finding a beautifully illustrated, intact chapter in that otherwise tattered book of life. They reveal the incredible diversity and complexity of past ecosystems that the normal fossil record only hints at, showing us just how much is usually lost. They are the geological equivalent of finding a perfectly preserved time capsule packed with treasures you never expected to see. Now, for a quirky fringe tidbit related to these gaps, the concept of ghost lineages. These are evolutionary lines that we infer must have existed, even if we have no direct fossil evidence for them during specific time periods. Scientists can reconstruct family trees of life using the anatomical features of known fossils and the DNA of living organisms. Sometimes these trees suggest that a particular group must have split off and existed for millions of years before it first appears in the fossil record. These missing branches are the ghost lineages, haunting the gaps in our knowledge. It's like knowing someone must have had grandparents, even if you can't find their photographs or birth certificates. Or consider this. Perhaps some of these gaps aren't just about poor preservation, but they might also represent periods of incredibly rapid evolutionary change, a concept loosely tied to the theory of punctuated equilibrium. It's like evolution decided to take an express elevator for a few floors, while the fossil-making process was patiently waiting for the stairs, thus missing the action. The existence and interpretation of these gaps often lead to healthy scientific discussion. Paleontologists continue to debate the significance of certain gaps in the fossil record. Are they primarily due to a lack of preservation, meaning the fossils are out there somewhere or were never formed? Or do some gaps reflect genuine periods of evolutionary stasis for certain groups, or conversely, bursts of very rapid localized change that were simply too fast or too geographically restricted to leave a dense fossil trail? The arguments can get quite animated, in a wonderfully academic, sleepy way, of course. Thinking about these missing pieces, these lost stories, brings us back to our overarching theme of Earth's silent dawn and its pre-human narratives. If the record of ordinary life, creatures that existed in vast numbers, sometimes with robust hard parts, is so incredibly patchy, imagine how much more challenging it would be to find traces of any hypothetical technologically advanced pre-human society. Their artifacts, their structures, their very existence would be subject to the same, if not more intense processes of decay, destruction, and deep burial that erase so much of biological history. The gaps in the fossil record are not just empty spaces. They are filled with the silent echoes of lost species, lost ecosystems, and perhaps lost worlds of experience far beyond our current imagining. Trying to reconstruct the full history of life from the fossil record is like trying to understand a grand epic novel by reading only a few randomly selected, weathered sentences from each chapter. You get tantalizing glimpses of the plot, intriguing hints of the main characters, but oh, the untold stories that whisper between those preserved lines.
We've acknowledged the vast, tattered nature of Earth's fossil diary, with its missing chapters and faded ink. It's a sobering thought that so many life forms, entire ecosystems, have vanished without a direct trace. So, if the biological record is so often silent, where else might we listen for echoes of Earth's deepest, most forbidden histories? What if the rocks themselves, the very fabric of the planet's crust, hold their own subtle clues, their own faint whispers of intelligences or extraordinary events long since passed into geological oblivion? We're shifting our focus now from the direct, if fragmented, evidence of past life to the indirect storytelling of geology itself. Imagine the Earth's crust not just as a foundation, but as an immense, ancient archive. Each layer of rock, each mineral vein, each subtle shift in chemical composition is a potential line in a planetary saga. Of course, as we've discussed, this library has seen better days. Many of its oldest volumes have been weathered to dust, cooked by unimaginable heat and pressure until their original text is illegible, or simply swallowed back into the Earth's molten heart through the slow, inexorable grind of plate tectonics. What remains is often a story of environmental conditions, ancient climates, the composition of forgotten atmospheres, the chemistry of primordial oceans. This is the realm of mainstream science, like paleoclimatology and sedimentology, where geologists patiently decode the planet's physical past. One of the most powerful tools for this detective work lies in geochemistry, particularly the study of isotope ratios. Isotopes are different versions of the same element, varying slightly in mass. The relative abundance of these isotopes in ancient rocks can tell us incredible things. Carbon isotopes, for instance, can reveal changes in the amount of biological activity, like massive blooms of photosynthetic life or huge burials of organic carbon. Or they can signal enormous releases of carbon into the atmosphere, perhaps from volcanic events, or, as we touched upon with the Silurian hypothesis, even from the industrial activity of a long-lost civilization. Oxygen isotopes locked in ancient minerals can act as paleothermometers, revealing the temperatures of ancient oceans or the extent of ice sheets.
Sulfur isotopes might hint at the presence of specific microbial metabolisms in anoxic environments, or betray periods of intense volcanic outgassing. It's like trying to reconstruct a complex symphony by analyzing only the faintest overtones and harmonics that have managed to resonate through millions of years. It's subtle work, listening for these faint whispers, trying to identify a specific anomalous voice, say the signature of a forgotten intelligence, from the general geological hubbub, is like trying to identify one particular person's sigh in the recording of a crowded stadium. Possible in theory, but breathtakingly difficult in practice. Beyond the chemistry, what about the physical structures? Could unusual geological formations or mineral deposits, those that currently have perfectly reasonable natural explanations, hold a secondary, hidden meaning? This is where we tread very carefully into the realm of deep speculation. Geologists are excellent at explaining how mountains rise, how sediments layer, how minerals concentrate through natural processes. But what if an ancient intelligence didn't build cities of stone that would inevitably crumble, but instead manipulated geological materials on a vast scale, perhaps in ways that subtly mimic or slightly alter these natural processes? Think of large-scale earthworks that, over millions of years, become so eroded and integrated into the landscape that they appear to be natural hills or valleys. Or perhaps unique ore concentrations that were once ancient waste deposits, now geochemically altered into something that looks like a natural lode. It's not about disputing established geology, but about gently questioning whether our current interpretations always capture the full story, especially when dealing with timescales that dwarf human experience. The immense challenge here is a concept known as equifinality. This means that different processes can often lead to very similar or even identical outcomes in the geological record. That puzzling isotopic anomaly? It could be from a series of colossal volcanic eruptions, or it could be from a massive meteorite impact, or, in our most speculative dreams, it could be the faint chemical echo of ancient industry. Distinguishing between these possibilities when the event is buried under millions of years of rock and time is a monumental task. It's why these geological whispers are so faint and so easily lost in the background noise of a dynamic planet. Is that strange blip in the data a genuine planetary burp, a sign of some mundane geological indigestion? Or is it something, well, let's call it more? Let's entertain a specific, quirky, fringe tidbit for a moment. We know from mainstream scientific discovery about the Oklo Natural Nuclear Reactor in Gabon. About 2 billion years ago, a rich deposit of uranium ore, under specific conditions involving groundwater, spontaneously initiated and sustained nuclear fission reactions for hundreds of thousands of years. It's a stunning example of nature's capacity for the extraordinary. Now, imagine, purely as a sleepy thought experiment, finding another such ancient nuclear reactor site. But what if this one had subtle anomalies, unusual isotopic byproducts, not quite matching a purely natural fission process, or a configuration that suggested some, well, let's call it assisted natural engineering? Imagine finding a 2-billion-year-old nuclear reactor that looks mostly natural, but deep within its core, there's a structure that looks suspiciously like someone tried to install a dimmer switch, or perhaps left behind a very, very old spanner? That would certainly liven up a geology conference, wouldn't it? Pure speculation, of course, designed to make you ponder the limits of what we consider natural. These kinds of interpretive challenges are common, even without invoking lost civilizations. Geologists often debate the precise triggers for ancient anoxic events or rapid climate changes that are clearly recorded in rock strata. They carefully weigh the relative contributions of factors like large-scale volcanism, subtle changes in Earth's orbit affecting sunlight, complex biogeochemical feedbacks involving microbial life, or the tectonic opening and closing of seaways. Understanding these intricate natural dances is vital, as it provides the baseline against which any truly anomalous, potentially unnatural signal would have to be measured. The search for technosignatures, indicators of technology from civilizations beyond Earth, is a growing field in astronomy. The Silurian hypothesis essentially encourages us to apply a similar mindset to our own planet's deep past. What geological technosignatures would be both unambiguous and capable of surviving for tens or hundreds of millions of years? Perhaps unique, stable polymers that couldn't form naturally, or isotopic ratios so bizarre they defy any known terrestrial or cosmic process. We haven't found such smoking guns, but the question itself pushes the boundaries of how we think about evidence and absence. It truly is like the planet is speaking in a very subtle language of mineralogy, isotopes, and strata, and we, as a species, are just beginning to learn the basic grammar. Sometimes we catch a clear word, sometimes just a confusing mumble from an eon we can't barely comprehend. As you drift deeper into your rest, imagine yourself as a geological linguist, patiently listening to the Earth's faint, stony whispers, wondering what untold stories are still waiting to be deciphered from its silent, ancient heart.
We've been listening intently to the faint whispers held within Earth's ancient rocks, pondering how geology itself might hint at stories long vanished, or intelligences that left only the most subtle of chemical signatures. This exploration of Earth as a complex, interconnected system, whose history is etched in stone and isotope, leads us naturally to a rather profound and elegant idea: the concept of Gaia, the Earth as a single, self-regulating entity, almost like a living being itself. We're shifting our perspective from searching for isolated specific events in the deep past to considering the very nature of the planetary stage upon which all these silent dramas have unfolded. The Gaia hypothesis, first proposed in the 1970s by the atmospheric chemist James Lovelock, with significant contributions from microbiologist Lynn Margulis, isn't just a poetic metaphor, it's a mainstream scientific hypothesis that has profoundly influenced how we understand our world, forming a cornerstone of what we now call Earth system science. In essence, Gaia theory suggests that Earth's biosphere, all living things, from the smallest microbe to the largest whale, interacts dynamically with the non-living components of the planet: the atmosphere, the hydrosphere, oceans, rivers, and ice, and the lithosphere, rocks and soil. Together, these components form a complex, synergistic system that has, over geological timescales, maintained conditions relatively favorable for life to persist and flourish. It's named, quite fittingly, after Gaia, the ancient Greek goddess who personified the Earth. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean the Earth is alive in the sense of having a consciousness or a will like a giant sentient space being from a vintage sci-fi novel. Rather, it behaves like a living organism in its remarkable ability to maintain a degree of homeostasis, a stable internal environment despite external pressures and changes. Think of your own body maintaining a steady temperature or pH balance through a complex web of feedback loops. Gaia theory proposes that Earth does something similar on a planetary scale. We've already touched upon one of the most dramatic examples of life profoundly altering the planet: the Great Oxidation Event, driven by those industrious cyanobacteria. That was a planetary scale transformation, but Gaian feedbacks are often more subtle, ongoing processes. Consider the composition of our atmosphere.
The current levels of oxygen, carbon dioxide, and other gases are not just a happy accident of chemistry. They are actively maintained and cycled by living organisms. Forests and oceanic phytoplankton are huge players in the carbon cycle, absorbing vast quantities of CO2. Without life, Earth's atmosphere would be vastly different, likely much more like that of Mars or Venus, utterly inhospitable. Lovelock also proposed mechanisms by which life might influence global temperature. One famous example involves marine algae producing a gas called dimethyl sulfide, or DMS. When DMS enters the atmosphere, it can help seed the formation of clouds. More clouds mean a higher planetary albedo, more sunlight reflected back into space, which can have a cooling effect. So, in this scenario, thriving algal communities could, quite unintentionally, help to regulate the planet's thermostat. It's like a planetary air conditioning system run by microscopic sea creatures. Who knew that the secret to a comfy global climate might involve something that, on a bad day at the beach, contributes to that slightly funky low tide smell? To illustrate how such self-regulation could occur without conscious effort, Lovelock developed a simple but brilliant computer model called Daisy World. Imagine a planet populated only by two types of daisies: black daisies that absorb sunlight and warm their surroundings, and white daisies that reflect sunlight and cool their environment. As the planet's sun gets warmer, as our sun has over billions of years, the black daisies might initially thrive in the cooler parts, warming the planet. But if it gets too warm for them, they die back, and the white daisies, which prefer slightly warmer conditions but also cool their environment, might spread. This interplay, driven by simple rules of growth and competition, can lead to the planet maintaining a surprisingly stable temperature over a wide range of solar luminosities. It's a beautiful demonstration that complex, self-regulating behavior can emerge from simple components and feedback loops. It's not that the daisies are trying to regulate the temperature; their individual survival strategies collectively produce that outcome. When first proposed, the Gaia hypothesis faced its share of criticism. Some scientists felt it was too teleological, implying a kind of purposeful planetary intelligence, or that it wasn't rigorously testable. However, over the decades, as our understanding of Earth's complex systems has grown, many core Gaian ideas have been integrated into mainstream science. The focus is now less on a sentient Earth and more on the intricate, observable feedback mechanisms within the Earth system. It's not that the planet wants to stay habitable for us, but rather that systems that inadvertently create and maintain stability are, by their very nature, more likely to persist through geological time. It's a kind of natural selection, writ large, on a planetary canvas. Now, for a quirky fringe tidbit, or perhaps a more philosophical musing to accompany your descent into sleep, while the scientific Gaia is about emergent properties and feedback loops, the idea has certainly resonated with more spiritual or holistic worldviews that envision Earth as a truly conscious entity. Could there be a form of planetary consciousness, an awareness woven into the very fabric of the biosphere and geosphere that we simply lack the means to perceive? This is beyond science, of course, but it's a soothing thought for some. On a more grounded note, many ancient cultures and indigenous traditions held a deep reverence for the Earth as a living, nurturing mother. Perhaps, without complex climate models or isotopic analysis, they intuitively grasped the profound interconnectedness and self-sustaining nature of the world around them. Maybe our distant ancestors just kind of got that it's generally a bad idea to aggressively annoy the giant life-sustaining entity you happen to be living on. Seems like pretty solid advice, even for us modern folk with all our sophisticated gadgets. Even within the scientific framework, scientists continued to debate the strength and significance of various biotic feedback mechanisms in Earth's current climate system. How resilient are these Gaian systems? How will they respond to the very rapid human-induced changes we're now imposing, such as massive greenhouse gas emissions or widespread deforestation? Understanding these complex interactions is one of the most urgent challenges facing Earth science systems today. How might the Gaia concept intersect with our exploration of forbidden history and lost pre-human stories? If the Earth is indeed a self-regulating, almost homeostatic system, it implies that it might also be very efficient at healing or smoothing over disturbances. Traces of past events, even catastrophic ones, or the remnants of a hypothetical ancient civilization, might be more effectively buffered, recycled, or obscured by an active Gaian system than by a purely passive, geologically inert planet. Perhaps some unexplained shifts in the geological record, currently attributed to purely geophysical causes, could even be interpreted very speculatively as the planet's systemic responses to ancient stresses. Imagine the whole planet as a giant, slowly turning kaleidoscope, where every tiny metabolic sigh of the smallest microbe, every leaf unfurling, every current shifting in the deep ocean can eventually influence the entire global pattern. It's a comforting thought, in a mind-bogglingly complex sort of way, to feel part of such an immense, ancient, and subtly responsive system. As you drift off, sense that slow planetary breath, the eons-long rhythm of Earth's living systems quietly maintaining the conditions for life's unending, often silent story.
We've just been contemplating Earth as Gaia, a vast, interconnected living system, breathing and cycling through eons, its life forms subtly and profoundly shaping its very fabric. This planetary perspective sets the stage for us to zoom back in, to explore some of the specific and often deeply puzzling forms that life itself was taking in the ages just before the well-known explosion of animal diversity in the Cambrian period. You're now drifting into the late Proterozoic Eon, specifically the Ediacaran period, which stretches from about 635 to 539 million years ago. This is the threshold of a new biological era, a time when Earth was perhaps recovering from immense snowball Earth glaciations. Oxygen was on the rise, and the continents were configured in unfamiliar patterns, drifting and jostling like colossal, slow-motion ice flows. In the dimly lit ancient seabeds of this Ediacaran world, a strange and wonderful collection of organisms began to appear, collectively known as the Ediacaran biota. These are the true stars of this chapter in Earth's silent dawn, and they represent some of the earliest, mainstream scientific evidence we have for large, complex, multicellular life. But when you picture them, don't imagine anything quite like the animals you know today. These were, for the most part, soft-bodied creatures, leaving their imprints in fine-grained sandstones in places as far-flung as the Ediacara Hills of Australia, where they were first famously studied, Mistaken Point in Newfoundland, the White Sea coast of Russia, and parts of Namibia. Imagine yourself scuba diving, if you could, in these ancient shallow seas. The water is cool. The sunlight filtering down is perhaps a bit muted by a different atmospheric composition. And on the seabed, instead of coral reefs or bustling fish, you see things that look like fronds, anchored to the bottom, gently swaying, but not plants in the modern sense, creatures like Charnia. You might see flat, segmented, almost quilted-looking organisms lying on the microbial mats that still carpeted much of the seafloor, the famous Dickinsonia, some of which could reach impressive sizes up to a meter across. There are disc-shaped impressions like asphodel, and more mobile-looking bilaterally symmetrical forms like Sprigina, which some have controversially suggested might be an early arthropod or annelid worm ancestor. It was a world of bizarre shapes, almost like an underwater sculpture garden designed by an artist with a very peculiar imagination. It was less Jaws and more Finding Nemo's extremely chill, slightly weird, and possibly inflatable distant ancestors.
The biggest puzzle these fossils present is simply, what were they? Their classification has been a source of intense scientific discussion for decades. Were they the dawn of animal life as we know it? Early sponges, cnidarians like jellyfish and corals, or perhaps primitive ancestors of bilaterian animals, those with a distinct head and tail, left and right sides? Some features certainly hint at this, but many Ediacaran organisms have body plans that don't quite fit neatly into any modern animal group. This has led to alternative interpretations. One prominent idea, championed by paleontologist Dolph Seelocker, was that many of these Ediacaran forms represented a distinct, extinct kingdom of life he called the Vendobionta, essentially a failed experiment in multicellularity, with a unique quilted or air mattress style of construction that vanished before the Cambrian really got going. Others have suggested that some could have been giant single-celled protists called foraminifera, or even lichens or fungi thriving in the marine environment. Scientists still vigorously debate the phylogenetic placement of many Ediacaran organisms, with some key fossils being reclassified multiple times as new analytical techniques are applied or new, better-preserved specimens come to light. They are like enigmatic Rorschach tests from deep time. What you see in them depends a lot on your perspective and the latest data. Their lifestyles are equally mysterious. Most seem to have been sessile, meaning they were fixed in one place, likely absorbing nutrients directly from the seawater through their body surfaces, a process called osmostrophy. Or perhaps they hosted symbiotic microbes within their tissues, much like modern corals do. Given their often large, flat bodies, maximizing surface area would have been advantageous for this kind of nutrient uptake. Some, like Dickinsonia, show evidence of having moved across the seabed, leaving behind feeding traces as they apparently grazed on the rich microbial mats. However, for many of these organisms, clear evidence of mouths, guts, anuses, or complex sensory organs is conspicuously absent. It was a world that, for a long time, seems to have lacked significant predation as a major evolutionary driver. The primary concerns were likely just staying put, absorbing food, and perhaps not getting buried by too much sediment. But this quiet Ediacaran world didn't last forever. Towards the end of the period, and leading into the Cambrian, the fossil record starts to show hints of change. The first convincing trace fossils of burrowing animals appear, signs that organisms were starting to explore life within the sediment, not just on top of it. And some researchers suggest that early forms of predation might have begun to exert pressure, perhaps driving the evolution of more mobile or better protected life forms. Most of the characteristic Ediacaran organisms disappear from the fossil record around the Precambrian-Cambrian boundary, about 539 million years ago. What caused their decline? Was it a mass extinction event triggered by environmental change, like shifts in ocean chemistry or oxygen levels? Were they simply outcompeted by the new kinds of animals emerging in the Cambrian period, creatures with more sophisticated body plans, guts, and mobility? Were they eaten into oblivion by the first true predators? Or did some of them not truly disappear, but rather evolve into the earliest Cambrian animals, their ancestral Ediacaran forms simply being superseded by their descendants? The end of the Ediacaran biota is a whodunit worthy of its own geological detective novel. For a quirky, fringe tidbit to muse upon, consider the Garden of Ediacara concept. This paints the Ediacaran period as a kind of peaceful, almost idyllic interlude in Earth's history, a time when complex multicellular life first flourished in the absence of intense predation. It was a brief window where life experimented with large, sessile forms without the immediate need for shells, spines, or rapid escape. It's a romantic notion, perhaps, but it highlights the unique ecological conditions that might have prevailed. Or, to take it further, what if some of these Ediacaran life forms were so profoundly alien in their fundamental biology, so different from anything alive today, that our attempts to understand them using modern categories are like trying to understand an advanced alien technology by only having ever seen its discarded screen protector? That's kind of where we are with some of these more enigmatic fossils. And what would these strange beings have watched on primordial TV, if such a thing existed? Probably a lot of slow TV. Watch sediment accrete, season 5 million, or perhaps competitive biofilm grazing. Even if many of the Ediacaran forms were ultimately evolutionary dead ends, their existence is profoundly significant. They demonstrate that life on Earth had crossed a major threshold, evolving the genetic and developmental pathways necessary to build large, complex, multicellular bodies. They were the planet's first grand experiment in organismal architecture, laying the groundwork for the explosion of animal diversity that was to follow in the Cambrian. These strange, silent beings of the Ediacaran seas were the quiet pioneers, proving that complexity was possible, even if their particular expressions of it were not all destined to endure. As you drift deeper into your slumber, picture these serene, alien gardens of the deep past, a testament to life's endless, patient creativity.
We've just been wandering through the enigmatic underwater gardens of the Ediacaran period, contemplating those strange, soft-bodied pioneers of multicellular life and their mysterious exit from the world stage. Their disappearance, whether a gradual fading or a more abrupt vanishing act, hints at the profound influence of environmental pressures and the ever-present possibility of planetary-scale upheavals. This leads us naturally to consider the grander theme of global resets, those massive natural cataclysms that have periodically reshaped our early planet, acting like immense, indifferent editors of Earth's unfolding story. These aren't necessarily events that wiped the slate entirely clean back to the primordial soup, but they were certainly profound enough to cause widespread extinctions, dramatically alter climates, and redirect the very course of evolution. One of the most dramatic, and frankly quite chilling, examples of such a reset is the mainstream scientific theory of snowball Earth. Picture this. During parts of the Cryogenian period, roughly between 720 and 635 million years ago, just before those Ediacaran creatures made their debut, our entire planet may have been almost completely encased in ice, from the poles right down to the tropics. You're floating above a gleaming white marble, the ocean's frozen solid to a depth of perhaps a kilometer or more, continents buried under colossal ice sheets. The sun, though shining, would reflect fiercely off this icy expanse, creating an almost unbearable glare. The cold would be unimaginable. Life, of course, didn't entirely give up. It likely clung on in geothermal hotspots near volcanoes, in thin films of meltwater, perhaps in patches of thin ice or open water near the equator, if such refugia existed, or even within the ice itself. Imagine Earth hitting the planetary snooze button under a giant glistening ice blanket for a few million years at a time. Talk about a long winter nap for the entire globe. What could cause such an extreme planetary deep freeze? The mechanisms are complex and still debated, but they likely involved a perfect storm of conditions. The breakup of the ancient supercontinent Rodinia around this time might have played a role, creating new coastlines and increasing rainfall, which in turn would draw down atmospheric carbon dioxide, a key greenhouse gas, through the weathering of rocks. Once the cooling began, a runaway ice albedo feedback loop could take over. More ice means more sunlight reflected, which means more cooling, which means more ice, and so on, until the whole planet succumbed. Eventually, it's thought that volcanic activity, continuing to pump CO2 into the atmosphere, even under the ice, would gradually build up greenhouse gases again, eventually leading to a dramatic, relatively rapid thawing. These snowball Earth events were true global resets. They would have placed immense stress on any life existing at the time,
and the subsequent meltdowns would have flushed vast amounts of nutrients from the land into the oceans, potentially fueling the evolutionary diversification that followed, including the rise of the Ediacaran biota. Then there are the large igneous provinces, or LIPs. These are colossal outpourings of volcanic rock, covering vast areas with lava flows and releasing enormous quantities of gases into the atmosphere over geologically short timescales, perhaps hundreds of thousands to a few million years. While the most famous LIPs, like the Siberian traps linked to the devastating end Permian extinction, the Great Dying, or the Deccan traps in India around the time the dinosaurs, except for birds, checked out, are from later periods. The phenomenon of massive volcanism is an ancient one. These events can trigger dramatic climate change, either warming due to greenhouse gases like CO2 and methane, or cooling due to sulfate aerosols reflecting sunlight. They can lead to ocean anoxia, or lack of oxygen, acid rain, and widespread environmental devastation. Any LIP in the Precambrian would have been a serious planetary game-changer, a fiery reset button. And of course, we can't forget the ever-present threat from above. We've talked about the intense bombardment during the Hadean Eon, but significant asteroid and comet impacts have continued to punctuate Earth's history, albeit with decreasing frequency. The Chicxulub impact, 66 million years ago, widely implicated in the demise of the non-avian dinosaurs, is the poster child for this kind of cosmic reset. An impact of that magnitude, or even larger ones that might have occurred in deeper Precambrian time, would unleash a catastrophic sequence of events: immense shock waves, global firestorms from superheated ejecta falling back to Earth, impact tsunamis, followed by a prolonged impact winter as dust and aerosols choked the atmosphere, blocking sunlight and causing temperatures to plummet. It's nature's rather brutal way of saying, okay, everyone out of the evolutionary pool, we're trying a completely new theme for the next geologic era. Now, for a truly quirky, fringe tidbit to drift off with, the nemesis hypothesis. This theory, which is not widely accepted in the scientific community, but makes for a fascinating sleepy thought, proposes that our sun might have a dim, undiscovered companion star, Nemesis, on a very long, eccentric orbit. Periodically, say every 26 million years or so, Nemesis supposedly passes through the Oort cloud, the vast sphere of icy bodies at the outermost edge of our solar system. This gravitational nudge would send a shower of comets hurtling towards the inner solar system, dramatically increasing the chances of a major impact on Earth, potentially explaining perceived periodicities in mass extinction events. It's a dramatic idea, a kind of cosmic clockwork of doom, though direct evidence for Nemesis remains elusive, to put it mildly. Another perhaps more grounded speculative thought: could some of these ancient resets have been so utterly profound that they effectively sterilized vast portions of the planet, perhaps even the entire surface, forcing life to reboot from extremely resilient microbes surviving in deep subterranean or hydrothermal refugia? Such an event would be an almost complete erasure of previous biological narratives. The study of these ancient cataclysms is, naturally, fraught with challenges and ongoing discussions. For instance, when a mass extinction event is identified in the rock record, scientists actively debate the relative importance of various kill mechanisms. Take the Chicxulub impact. Was it the immediate devastation of the impact itself? The subsequent impact winter? The massive release of climate-altering gases from vaporized rock? Or the longer-term ecological collapse that delivered the final blow to so many species? Similarly, the precise triggers for initiating a snowball Earth event, and equally importantly, the mechanisms that allowed the planet to eventually thaw, are still areas of intense research and debate. Considering these ancient global resets adds another layer of profound difficulty to our search for forbidden histories or traces of hypothetical pre-human intelligences. If a sophisticated civilization, like the one pondered in the Silurian hypothesis, had managed to arise, it would have been exceptionally vulnerable to such planetary-scale disasters. A snowball Earth would freeze it solid. A major LIP would choke it with volcanic gases and ash. And a large asteroid impact would, quite simply, pulverize it. If there was, for instance, a Silurian Las Vegas, glitzy and sprawling, a snowball Earth event would have put a rather serious damper on the casino profits, not to mention burying it under a mile or two of solid ice. Good luck finding evidence of that in the geological record after a few 100 million years of subsequent geological reprocessing. These cataclysms not only destroy, but they also act as incredibly efficient erasers of any subtle traces that might have otherwise survived. As you drift further, imagine these immense forces, these planetary resets, not just as destructive events, but as powerful, albeit terrifying, agents of change and renewal. They are the deep, sometimes violent punctuation marks in Earth's long, silent narrative, clearing the stage, shaking up the evolutionary costume, and creating new, unforeseen opportunities for life's persistent, ever-experimenting spirit.
We've just journeyed through some of Earth's most dramatic ancient global resets, those colossal snowball Earth events, fiery large igneous provinces, and devastating cosmic impacts. These weren't just moments of destruction. They were profound interruptions that cleared the evolutionary stage, creating vast ecological vacuums and, in their aftermath, entirely new opportunities for life to experiment, to diversify, to try out utterly new ways of being. This leads us to wonder about the uncharted paths of evolution, the bizarre or even alien-like creatures that might have briefly flickered into existence in these tumultuous times or in isolated, forgotten corners of the early Earth, only to vanish without leaving a clear trace in the fossil record we currently possess. Evolution, as you know, isn't a grand, predetermined march towards some ultimate goal, like us humans, for instance. That's just our ego talking. It's more like a relentless cosmic tinkerer, a blind watchmaker, constantly fiddling with the available parts, responding to the immediate pressures of the environment. For every lineage that survives and flourishes, leaving descendants that we might recognize or dig up as fossils, countless others likely branched off, explored a different way of life, and then quietly faded into extinction. We only see the highlight reel of the winners, or at least the lineages lucky enough to make it through the next filter. Tonight, we're drifting into the shadows of that highlight reel, pondering the lost evolutionary experiments. The mainstream scientific example that gives us the clearest glimpse into just how weird life could be is the Cambrian explosion, starting around 539 million years ago. While many of its fossils are now relatively well studied, the creatures it produced were, for a long time, deeply puzzling. Think of the Burgess Shale in Canada and other similar deposits around the world. These rocks have preserved an astonishing menagerie of early animals, many of which look like they crawled out of a fever dream. You have Opabenia, with its 5 stalked eyes and a frontal nozzle that looked like a vacuum cleaner hose tipped with a grasping claw. There's Hallucigenia, a creature so strange that early reconstructions had it walking on its defensive spines, upside down and backwards. And Wiwaxia, a slug-like animal covered in scales and long, sharp spines. Then there's the formidable Anomalocaris, a giant, for its time, predator with formidable grasping appendages and a circular, tooth-lined mouth. Many of these weird wonders represent early branches of major animal groups or perhaps even entirely extinct phyla, fundamental body plans that didn't make it in the long run. They are a vibrant testament to a time when life was rapidly exploring new forms, some of which now seem utterly alien. Now, if the Cambrian, an era for which we actually have some spectacular fossil windows, could produce such oddities, what might have evolved and vanished in the far vaster, more poorly understood stretches of the Precambrian, or in the chaotic aftermath of one of those global resets we discussed? What if life, in its infinite capacity for experimentation, tried out forms so fundamentally different from the carbon-based, water-dependent DNA-RNA life we know that we'd barely recognize them as living? While the idea of silicon-based life, a classic science fiction trope, faces significant chemical hurdles on a watery planet like Earth, carbon is just so much more versatile. It's a fun, sleepy thought to entertain. Imagine crystalline creatures slowly etching their way through rocks, or life forms using a different solvent than water, perhaps ammonia or methane, though this is incredibly speculative for Earth's known environments. Consider organisms with metabolisms that seem impossible to us, or reproductive strategies that would make a biologist's head spin. Imagine, if you will, a creature from some forgotten eon that communicated primarily by composing intricate symphonies of bioluminescent pulses, its body a living, shifting constellation of light. Or perhaps an organism that navigated its world through incredibly sophisticated electroreception, sensing the faintest bioelectric fields of other life forms in murky, anoxic waters. It's fun to imagine such things, say, a creature that reproduced by interpretive dance using 17 fluorescent tentacles. It probably wouldn't fossilize particularly well, and grant applications for studying its mating rituals would be an absolute nightmare for some unfortunate future paleontologist. The renowned paleontologist Stephen Jay Gould often talked about the concept of contingency in evolution, famously using the metaphor of replaying life's tape. If you could rewind the history of life on Earth and start it over from some early point, would the outcome be the same? Would humans or anything like us inevitably evolve? Gould argued, quite persuasively, that the answer is almost certainly no. Tiny, unpredictable chance events, a stray asteroid, a subtle shift in climate, a lucky genetic mutation, can send evolution cascading down entirely different pathways. This implies that the forms of life we see today are just one possible outcome among an almost infinite array of might-have-beens. Each of those might-have-beens is an uncharted path, a lost world of biological forms. Imagine Earth's early days as a sort of planetary talent show, a primordial idol, where most acts got gonged off stage by some environmental catastrophe or sheer bad luck before they even finished their first evolutionary song. We, and all other life today, are just the descendants of the acts that somehow managed to impress the judges or simply survive the auditions. For a quirky, fringe tidbit to ponder, what if some ancient ecosystems were dominated not by discrete individual multicellular organisms as we usually imagine, but by vast, complex microbial consortia that behaved in some ways like superorganisms, but without a fixed, easily fossilizable body plan? Think of something far more complex than a simple biofilm, perhaps a kind of sentient slime mold on a continental scale, capable of sophisticated information processing and environmental manipulation, but leaving behind only ambiguous chemical signatures or strangely textured sedimentary rocks. Or going even farther back, could some of those very early attempts at abiogenesis, the origin of life itself, have produced fleeting, bizarre, chemical liphoids, self-replicating, metabolizing entities that weren't based on DNA or RNA as we know it, and had no evolutionary future, but briefly existed as weird, oily films or crystalline growths in some primordial puddle? The very nature of these uncharted paths means they are, by definition, hard to pin down.
Scientists still debate the extent to which the major directions of evolution are constrained by underlying physical laws and developmental genetics versus being open to a vast range of contingent possibilities. In other words, is life's toolkit fundamentally limited, leading to recurring themes and shapes? Or is the canvas so broad that almost any form imaginable could theoretically arise if given the right sequence of chances? The truth probably lies somewhere in between. The beauty of considering these lost creatures and uncharted evolutionary avenues is that it reminds us that the alien is not necessarily something we need to find on other planets. Earth's own deep past, if we could truly see it in all its forgotten diversity, would likely be populated with organisms and ecosystems so bizarre, so utterly unfamiliar to our modern eyes, that they would seem entirely extraterrestrial. It's like wandering through an infinite imaginary museum, its halls filled with the ghosts of creatures that never quite made it into the official history books of life, each one a silent, beautiful testament to life's boundless and often very sleepy creativity.
We've just meandered through the hypothetical museum of evolution's uncharted paths, imagining the myriad bizarre and wonderful creatures that might have briefly graced Earth's stage, only to vanish like dreams upon waking. This astonishing biodiversity, these countless lost experiments in form and function, were all made possible by one crucial, almost overwhelming factor: the sheer, mind-bending immensity of geological time. We've alluded to it, danced around it, but now we're going to try and face it head-on, or at least let its scale gently wash over us as we drift deeper into tonight's journey. We are talking about deep time. The term deep time itself was famously coined by writer John McPhee, but the concept was painstakingly pieced together by pioneering geologists like James Hutton in the 18th century and Charles Lyell in the 19th. This is a cornerstone of mainstream scientific understanding, the realization that Earth's history stretches back not just thousands, but billions of years, an expanse so vast that it utterly dwarfs the entire span of human existence, making our recorded history seem like a mere blink in the cosmic eye. Our everyday perception of time, minutes, hours, days, even a human lifetime, provides us with no intuitive framework to truly grasp such scales. To even begin to try, we often resort to analogies, though they all fall short in conveying the true depth. Carl Sagan's cosmic calendar is a classic. If the entire 13.8 billion year history of the universe is compressed into a single calendar year, Earth itself doesn't even form until early September. The earliest hints of life appear around late September or early October. The dinosaurs, those supposed titans of ancient history, roamed through much of December, only to vanish around the 28th or 29th. And all of recorded human history? That flashes by in the last few seconds of New Year's Eve, just before the stroke of midnight. Another common analogy is the football field. If the 4.5 billion year history of Earth is represented by a 100-yard field, from one goal line to the other, complex animal life appears only in the last 10 to 15 yards, and our species, Homo sapiens, occupies just the final, almost invisible fraction of an inch right at the very end zone. Perhaps a more personal analogy for you to visualize as you lie there, comfortable and still. Imagine your outstretched arm span, from the tip of one middle finger to the tip of the other, represents the entire history of our planet. Now, if you were to take a single light swipe with a nail file across the very edge of one fingernail, that tiny abrasion would erase all of recorded human history, all the empires, all the art, all the wars, all your favorite memes. Gone. Suddenly, worrying about that overdue library book or that awkward thing you said last week
seems a little less pressing in the grand scheme of things, doesn't it? It's genuinely difficult for our minds to process this. We are creatures evolved to deal with the immediate, the next meal, the changing seasons, the social dynamics of our small groups. Our brains simply aren't wired to intuitively feel the passage of eons. Contemplating deep time can be profoundly humbling. It can inspire a sense of awe at the sheer scale of existence, but it can also, for some, induce a kind of temporal vertigo, a dizzying awareness of our own fleeting presence in this immense cosmic play. Yet, paradoxically, for the purpose of sleep, this vastness can be incredibly comforting. Our individual worries and anxieties, when set against the backdrop of billions of years, can shrink to their proper, manageable, even insignificant proportions. Geologists, of course, don't just wave their hands and say, "It was a long time ago." They have developed sophisticated methods to measure and subdivide this immense chronology. You've heard of the geological timescale with its eons like the Hadean, Archean, Proterozoic, and our current Phanerozoic, further divided into eras, Paleozoic, Mesozoic, and Cenozoic, periods like Cambrian, Jurassic, and Quaternary, and epochs. These divisions are based on major changes in Earth's geology and the fossil record. And the dates? They come from radiometric dating techniques. While carbon-14 dating is useful for relatively recent organic materials, tens of thousands of years, methods like uranium-lead dating, potassium-argon dating, and others allow scientists to assign remarkably precise absolute ages to rocks that are hundreds of millions or even billions of years old by measuring the decay of radioactive isotopes. Coupled with stratigraphy, the careful study of rock layers in their relationships, these methods allow us to piece together Earth's incredibly long, if still incomplete, diary. Now, for a slightly quirky, fringe tidbit to gently turn over in your mind. Some people who spend a great deal of time contemplating geological timescales report experiencing a profound shift in perspective, a sense of geologic awe. It's not just an intellectual understanding, but an almost visceral feeling of connection to this immense past. Could it be that truly internalizing deep time has a subtle psychological or even spiritual effect, broadening our sense of self and our place in the universe? Or, for an even more whimsical notion, it's enough to make you wonder if rocks dream, not in our frenetic image-filled way, but perhaps in some incredibly slow, billion-year cycle of pressure, heat, and subtle chemical transformation. They witness eons. What ancient, silent stories might they hold in their crystalline hearts? Probably not about electric sheep, though. More likely about the slow dance of continents or the distant memory of a sun that shone a little differently. Even with our advanced dating techniques, the vastness of deep time ensures there are always areas of uncertainty and active discussion. For example, geochronologists often debate the precise calibration of certain points in the geological timescale, especially when dealing with the very oldest Precambrian rocks. Finding suitable minerals for dating in these ancient, often heavily metamorphosed terrains can be exceptionally challenging, and the error bars on those dates can sometimes span millions of years. There are also ongoing discussions about the tempo of geological change itself. Was it always slow and gradual, as the early uniformitarians proposed? Or were there periods of more rapid, catastrophic change that punctuated the long, slow rhythms? Deep time is the silent, sprawling canvas upon which all of Earth's stories, known and unknown, forbidden and forgotten, are painted. It's the essential ingredient that allows for the possibility of those uncharted evolutionary paths we just explored, for the rise and fall of entire biota like the Ediacaran, and yes, even for the speculative, ghostly presence of any hypothetical lost civilizations. There is just so much time for things to happen, for empires of microbes or even more complex beings to flourish and then be utterly, completely erased by the patient, relentless work of the planet. If Earth's entire 4.5 billion year history were compressed into a single 24-hour day, our species, Homo sapiens, would have arrived on the scene at about 2 seconds before midnight. Imagine all the incredible silent dramas that must have played out during the long hours when we were still just a faint, theoretical glimmer in the planet's far distant alarm setting. As you let this sense of immensity cradle you, feel the slow, ancient pulse of deep time. It's a rhythm that has weathered meteorite bombardments, global ice ages, the rise and fall of mountains and oceans. It's a rhythm that holds all of Earth's secrets. Let its vast, unhurried pace soothe you, reminding you that even the longest night eventually yields to dawn, and even the most profound mysteries are held within a timescale that offers endless room for wonder.
We've just been enveloped by the almost incomprehensible vastness of deep time, that immense chronology against which all of Earth's stories, known and unknown, are set. Reading that history from the fragmented rock record is a monumental challenge, like piecing together a forgotten language from scattered, weathered tablets. But there are other archives, other libraries of Earth's past that offer a different kind of record, often with astonishing detail, especially for more recent chapters of our planet's silent dawn. You're drifting now towards the Earth's coldest, most remote regions, the vast ice sheets of Antarctica and Greenland, and the high-altitude glaciers perched on mountain ranges. Here, locked within the ice itself, are some of the most elegant and revealing chronicles of our planet's relatively recent atmospheric and climatic past. These natural archives are known as ice cores. Imagine over countless millennia, snow falling layer upon layer in these frigid, wind-swept landscapes. Each snowfall buries the last, and as the weight of overlying snow accumulates, the deeper layers are compressed, their delicate snowflakes transforming into dense, crystalline ice. This isn't just any ice, it's a layered time capsule. This is mainstream science, a cornerstone of modern climate research. Scientists drill deep into these ice sheets, sometimes kilometers down, extracting long cylindrical cores of this ancient ice. Each core is a frozen column of history, with the oldest ice at the bottom and the youngest at the top, the layers often visibly distinct, like the rings of a very, very old tree. What secrets do these icy cylinders hold? Most remarkably, they contain tiny, trapped bubbles of air, actual physical samples of Earth's ancient atmosphere. As the snow compacted into ice, it ensnared these little pockets of the air that existed at that precise moment in time. In laboratories, scientists can carefully melt sections of the ice core in a vacuum and analyze these ancient air bubbles. They can measure the concentrations of greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide from hundreds of thousands of years ago, providing a direct record of how our atmosphere has changed. It's like having a library of ancient atmospheres all neatly filed away. It's a bit like discovering a layered popsicle of ancient history. Instead of finding forgotten fruit flavors as you lick your way down, you get traces of volcanic ash and perfectly preserved samples of prehistoric air. Deliciously informative in its own way. But the ice itself also tells a story. By analyzing the isotopic ratios of oxygen and hydrogen within the water molecules that make up the ice, scientists can estimate the local temperature at the time the snow originally fell. Heavier isotopes tend to be less common in snow that forms in colder conditions. So these ratios act as a remarkably precise paleothermometer. This has allowed us to reconstruct past temperature fluctuations with incredible detail,
revealing the ebb and flow of ice ages and warmer interglacial periods. Furthermore, these icy archives act as unwitting chroniclers of catastrophic events. When a large volcano erupts anywhere on the planet, it can spew vast quantities of ash and sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere. These particles can travel globally and eventually settle out onto the ice sheets, becoming trapped in a distinct layer. By identifying these tephra layers or sulfate spikes in ice cores from different locations, scientists can often pinpoint the timing of major volcanic eruptions with remarkable accuracy, even those that occurred tens or hundreds of thousands of years ago. These volcanic signatures also act as crucial time markers, helping to correlate and date different sections of the ice core and synchronize them with other climate records. The ice also traps atmospheric dust, which can tell us about past windiness, aridity, or the extent of deserts on the planet. Increased dust levels might indicate colder, drier glacial periods with more exposed land surfaces. Traces of pollen can sometimes be found, offering clues about past vegetation in distant lands. Even more subtly, scientists can look for specific chemical tracers that might indicate widespread biomass burning, like ancient forest fires, or in the very uppermost, most recent layers, the faint chemical fingerprints of industrial pollution from human activities. The timescales covered by these ice cores are impressive, though they don't reach into the truly deep time of eons past. Antarctic ice cores, like the famous Vostok and Epochs dome sea cores, have yielded records stretching back over 800,000 years, covering multiple glacial interglacial cycles. There are ongoing efforts to find even older ice, with hopes of pushing this record back to perhaps 1.5 million years or more. In Greenland, the ice sheets are generally younger and subject to faster flow, but they provide incredibly high-resolution records, sometimes with distinct annual layers visible, for the last 120,000 years or so, capturing the last great ice age and the transition to our current warmer period in exquisite detail. These frozen chronicles have been absolutely fundamental in understanding Earth's recent climate system. They show with stark clarity the tight coupling between atmospheric greenhouse gas concentrations and global temperatures. They have revealed that past climate change wasn't always slow and gradual. Sometimes there were remarkably abrupt shifts, with regional temperatures changing by several degrees Celsius within just a few decades or even years. Events like the Dansgaard-Osterkær cycles during the last ice age, or the Younger Dryas cold snap that briefly interrupted the warming trend at the end of it in exquisite detail. Now for a slightly quirky, fringe tidbit to drift with. Scientists also examine ice cores for traces of extraterrestrial material. Tiny micrometeorites, cosmic dust from comets or asteroids, constantly rain down on Earth. Ice sheets, particularly in pristine Antarctic environments, act as giant collectors for this material. Studying these particles can tell us about the composition of objects in our solar system and perhaps even about cosmic events in the distant past. Could an ice core layer, for example, hold evidence of a nearby supernova explosion in the form of specific isotopes? It's an intriguing possibility. Or, to stretch the imagination even further, what if, somewhere unimaginably deep and stable, perhaps buried miles beneath the East Antarctic ice sheet, or even on a perennially frozen body like Mars, existed ice from truly deep time, hundreds of millions or even billions of years old? Imagine finding a perfectly preserved popsicle from the Boring Billion. The flavor would probably be subtle despair with a hint of ancient microbe, but the scientific paper detailing its atmospheric bubbles would absolutely be groundbreaking. Naturally, the interpretation of these delicate ice records isn't without its challenges and discussions. For instance, scientists often debate the interpretation of very rapid climate shifts recorded in ice cores. trying to determine the exact sequence of events, the triggers, and whether these changes were truly global or more regionally focused. How quickly did different parts of the Earth system, like oceans and vegetation, respond to these abrupt jolts? And when it comes to the deepest, oldest ice, where the layers are incredibly compressed and thinned by the immense pressure, precisely dating the ice and distinguishing annual signals becomes a complex scientific puzzle. While ice cores don't typically reach into the eras where one might speculate about Silurian-style civilizations, they do hold the potential to reveal forbidden or forgotten aspects of our more recent planetary past, particularly those relevant to early human history and the environment our ancestors navigated. Could an ice core reveal evidence of a colossal, unrecorded volcanic eruption that plunged a region into darkness for years, impacting early human populations? Or perhaps unusual atmospheric chemistry from an unknown source? If our early human ancestors had a particularly enthusiastic and widespread series of barbecues that got seriously out of control and caused a noticeable regional haze, it might just show up as a tiny blip in the record, though knowing human nature, they'd probably try to blame it on a passing volcano. Some things, it seems, never truly change, even across the millennia. As you settle into your rest, imagine the vast, silent, frozen expanses of our planet's polar regions, where these icy chronicles are diligently, impersonally kept year after year, century after century. Picture those long, glistening cylinders being drawn up from the depths, each one a fragile scroll from Earth's library of winter, slowly whispering its ancient secrets of air and ice as it yields to the warmth of the laboratory.
We've just explored the frozen archives of Earth's polar ice sheets, cylindrical scrolls of ancient winter that whisper secrets of our planet's more recent atmospheric past. These icy records, as detailed as they are, only take us back so far, a mere fraction of Earth's immense journey. For the truly deep, silent epochs, the Hadean or the Archean, our own planet can be a frustratingly difficult librarian, constantly rewriting, erasing, and burying its oldest volumes. So where else might we look for clues to Earth's earliest, most forbidden stories? Tonight, you're drifting outwards, just a little way in cosmic terms, to our nearest celestial companion, that familiar, silent sentinel in our night sky, the moon. Imagine the moon not just as a beautiful ornament or a target for future astronauts, but as a colossal ancient witness plate. For over 4.5 billion years, it has been orbiting Earth, passively collecting whatever the solar system, and potentially our own planet, has thrown its way. This is a mainstream scientific concept. The moon, unlike the geologically dynamic Earth with its wind, water, and relentless plate tectonics, is a remarkably stable environment. It has no significant atmosphere to speak of, no weather to erode its features, and its volcanic activity largely ceased billions of years ago. This means that things that land on the moon or are formed there tend to stay there, remarkably preserved in the vacuum of space. It's like the solar system's incredibly ancient, very dusty attic, largely untouched for eons and potentially full of things Earth discarded or that just happened to drift by in the cosmic neighborhood. One of the most tantalizing possibilities is that the moon might harbor rocks from Earth's earliest childhood, actual pieces of our planet's primordial crust. We know that meteorites from the moon have been found on Earth, blasted off the lunar surface by impacts and eventually finding their way here. Could the reverse be true? During the Hadean and early Archean eons, Earth was subjected to an intense bombardment by massive asteroids and comets. These colossal impacts would have ejected vast quantities of crustal material, some of it potentially reaching escape velocity and journeying out into space.
A portion of this terrestrial debris could have been captured by the Moon's gravity and now lies scattered across its ancient, pockmarked surface. Finding and analyzing such terrestrial meteorites on the Moon would be like discovering pristine, unaltered pages from Earth's very first, long-lost chapter. These would be samples of rock that were destroyed or recycled on Earth billions of years ago, offering direct insights into the conditions on our nascent planet. In fact, within the treasure trove of samples brought back by the Apollo missions, a tiny fragment within a lunar rock known as Big Bertha has been tentatively identified by some researchers as a piece of very ancient Earth crust, perhaps over 4 billion years old, though this is still a subject of scientific discussion. Beyond being a potential repository for Earth's lost bits, the Moon's own geology and history are inextricably linked to ours, especially its violent birth in that colossal impact event we talked about earlier. The Moon's heavily cratered surface stands as a direct record of the bombardment intensity in the early solar system, particularly during the proposed late heavy bombardment around 4 to 3.8 billion years ago. Studying the ages and distribution of these craters and analyzing the lunar rocks returned by the Apollo and Soviet Luna missions has been absolutely crucial for calibrating our understanding of this tumultuous period, which profoundly affected early Earth as well. The lunar regolith, the powdery soil that blankets the Moon, also contains a fascinating record, including trapped particles from the solar wind, like helium-3, and isotopes produced by cosmic ray interactions, all of which tell stories about the Sun's history and the cosmic ray environment over millions of years. Now, let's gently entertain a quirky fringe tidbit for your sleepy contemplation. If Earth material could be blasted to the Moon, could it have carried stowaways? Some scientists have speculated that if primitive life had already emerged on Earth during these heavy bombardment periods, impacts could have launched microbe-laden rocks into space, with some potentially landing on the Moon. Could evidence of Earth's earliest, most resilient life forms, or at least their chemical biosignatures, be preserved in protected lunar environments, perhaps within meteorites or in the permanently shadowed craters near the lunar poles where water ice is known to exist? It's a long shot, but the Moon's sterile, static environment might just be a better place to preserve such fragile ancient traces than the dynamic Earth. Or, pushing the boat out even further into the sea of speculation, if any hypothetical pre-human technological society on Earth, like our Silurian friends, had developed even rudimentary space capabilities, or perhaps just produced some incredibly persistent and unusual atmospheric pollutants, could the faintest signature of their existence have been gently deposited on the lunar surface, awaiting discovery? Imagine future lunar archaeologists sifting through moondust and finding something utterly inexplicable, like a Silurian Coke can, or at least its molecular remnants. The deposit on that would be truly astronomical by now, wouldn't it? Of course, finding and definitively identifying ancient Earth rocks or more exotic traces on the vast lunar surface is an immense challenge. It's searching for a cosmic needle in almost an infinite haystack. And even if such a rock were found, confirming its terrestrial origin and its extreme antiquity would require incredibly careful and sophisticated analysis. Scientists still debate the exact flux of terrestrial material to the Moon, the efficiency of its delivery, and the likelihood of its survival and subsequent identification in lunar samples collected so far or by future missions. The Moon's surface, while geologically quiet, is still a harsh environment, exposed to relentless solar and cosmic radiation and extreme temperature swings, which could degrade delicate signatures over billions of years. Yet the Moon remains our silent scribe, patiently, impassionedly recording whatever the cosmos and our own Earth have sent its way.
It doesn't actively write or interpret, but it holds these records in a deep, airless freeze, largely protected from the relentless geological recycling that characterizes our home planet. Future lunar exploration, perhaps with rovers specifically designed to search for these ancient terrestrial relics, or advanced sample return missions, might finally unlock these dusty archives. The moon doesn't gossip, you see. It just sits there, serene and silvery, patiently collecting the universe's receipts, including those from Earth's wild, forgotten youth. We just need to get better at finding and reading them. As you feel yourself drifting, picture that quiet gray landscape under the stars, a landscape that has witnessed nearly the entirety of Earth's story from a respectful distance. It holds no malice, no judgment, just the accumulated dust of ages, and perhaps within that dust, the keys to understanding our own planet's deepest, most silent dawn.
We've just been gazing at our familiar moon, reimagining it as a silent scribe, a dusty attic potentially holding lost pages from Earth's earliest, most enigmatic chapters. Perhaps even fragments of our own planet's Hadean crust, or subtle hints of forgotten biological experiments. This idea that records of Earth's deep past might exist beyond our geologically restless world underscores the profound challenge of reconstructing those lost narratives. And as we drift towards the end of our long journey tonight, it brings us to a final, deeply reflective question. If there were truly advanced societies in Earth's deep past, what does the concept of such forgotten futures mean for our own understanding of history, progress, and our place in the grand cyclical unfolding of time? Our modern Western culture often tends to view history as a linear progression, a steady climb from simpler beginnings towards increasing complexity and advancement, with our current technological society perched confidently at the apex. But this is by no means the only way to see time and history. Many mainstream ancient cultures and philosophical traditions viewed time as cyclical, not as a straight arrow, but as a great wheel, turning through ages of creation, flourishing, decline, and eventual renewal. Think of the yugas in Hindu cosmology, the concept of vast cycles of golden ages followed by silver, bronze, and iron ages. Or the Stoic idea of ekpyrosis, a periodic conflagration and rebirth of the cosmos. If Earth has indeed hosted forgotten futures, civilizations that rose to heights of complexity and then vanished long before our own emergence, it would certainly lend a profound, almost eerie credence to these more cyclical perspectives. When we imagine an advanced deep past, it's also worth questioning our own biases about what advanced even means. We tend to project our own technological trajectory, industry, electronics, global networks. But what if a hypothetical ancient civilization was advanced in ways that are almost invisible to our current methods of detection? Perhaps their sophistication lay not in manipulating metals and fossil fuels, but in a deep understanding of consciousness, or in a symbiotic relationship with biology and the planetary systems. Maybe their idea of high technology was a perfectly self-sustaining biodegradable architecture, the ability to communicate telepathically, or perhaps just the profound wisdom to live in true harmony with the Gaian system we spoke of earlier. Their societal footprint might have been incredibly light, their wisdom woven into ecological patterns rather than monumental ruins. Imagine a society whose greatest achievements were not in building outwards, but in cultivating inner landscapes, or in fostering the health of the biosphere. Good luck finding that with a ground-penetrating radar survey or a chemical analysis of sediment cores. Their legacy might be more like a subtle, lingering fragrance than a discernible structure. If such civilizations, whatever their nature, did exist and then ultimately faded away,
Their lost stories would carry poignant lessons. They would speak to the inherent fragility of even the most sophisticated societies when pitted against the vastness of deep time and the immense power of planetary processes like those global resets we considered. They might caution us about the long-term sustainability of certain kinds of progress, suggesting that some paths, however dazzling in the short term, might lead to ecological or societal dead ends. The very fact that they would be forgotten implies an ultimate triumph of the planet's ability to reclaim, recycle, and erase. This isn't meant to be a somber thought as you drift towards sleep, but rather a deeply humbling one, fostering a sense of perspective that can be surprisingly peaceful. The possibility of forgotten futures profoundly redefines our own place in Earth's narrative. If we are not the first, or necessarily the only advanced intelligence to arise on this planet, it gently nudges aside any lingering notions of human exceptionalism as the sole inheritors of Earth's cognitive pinnacle. Instead, it places us within a much larger, more mysterious, and perhaps ongoing story of emergence, flourishing, and potential disappearance. The silent dawn of Earth that we've been exploring tonight then becomes not just about the origin of the first simple cells, but potentially about a long, repeating sequence of complex dawns, noons, and twilights for various forms of life and intelligence. For a truly quirky, fringe tidbit to accompany these thoughts, consider how many cultures around the world have ancient myths and legends of great floods, of gods who walked the earth, of ages of gold when humanity lived in peace and prosperity, followed by decline. While these are generally understood as allegorical or as regional historical memories, some have speculated very gently whether the most persistent and universal of these myths could be incredibly distorted folk memories, echoes passed down through countless generations of actual advanced societies from a deep past, or the cataclysms that might have ended them. Or could some of those uncharted paths in evolution we imagined have produced forms of intelligence that were profoundly non-humanoid and non-technological in our current sense, yet deeply sophisticated in their own ways? Imagine a civilization of hyper-intelligent, long-lived trees communicating through vast fungal networks. Their historical records encoded in complex genetic patterns or subtle ecological balances. Their libraries would be forests, their books written in chlorophyll and lignin. Of course, the interpretation of historical patterns is itself a complex field. Historians and archaeologists often debate the interpretation of cyclical patterns versus linear development even within known human history, let alone when speculating about the deep pre-human past. Are apparent cycles in the rise and fall of human empires truly indicative of a grand, repeating historical mechanism, or are they more a product of contingent factors and our pattern-seeking minds? It's a discussion that highlights how challenging it is to discern clear, overarching narratives from the complex tapestry of the past. Thinking about these forgotten futures possibly repeating isn't about succumbing to a sense of fatalism that we are doomed to follow some ancient, obliterated path. It's more about understanding that certain challenges, resource management, environmental stability, societal cohesion, might be recurring themes for any complex society that arises on a finite planet. It's like Earth is a very patient, very old teacher who keeps setting variations of the same challenging exam questions every few million or tens of millions of years, perhaps hoping that one group of students will eventually not only pass with flying colors, but also manage not to set the classroom on fire in the process. The knowledge that other futures might have been forgotten underscores the preciousness of memory, of learning, and of striving to build a future that might, just might, be remembered for the right reasons, even in the quiet gaze of deep time. And now, as our journey through the deep and silent past comes to a gentle close, allow your mind to soften, to let these vast images and eons begin to recede like a slow tide. The fiery birth of the planet, the first stirrings of life in ancient seas, the reign of microbes, the puzzles of the Ediacaran gardens, the immense resets, and the quiet whispers of lost histories. Let them all meld into a soothing backdrop of profound antiquity. There is a deep comfort in recognizing the immense scale of time, in feeling our own fleeting moment as part of something so much larger, so much older than ourselves. The earth has held countless dawns, endured unimaginable changes, and still it cradles life. Still it turns in its own slow, planetary way. The silences we've explored are not empty. They are filled with the potential of what was, the mystery of what might have been, and the quiet promise of what is yet to unfold in ages beyond our imagining. Let the darkness of your room be the darkness of deep space, or the quiet of the deep ocean floor. Let the soft hum of a fan be the sigh of ancient winds, or the turning of the earth itself. There are no forbidden histories here in this safe space of rest, only the gentle unfolding of a story too vast to be fully known, too ancient to be entirely grasped, but perfect to drift away upon. Feel any lingering thoughts dissolve like mist in the morning sun, leaving only a sense of peace, of stillness, of being held in the ageless embrace of time itself. You are a part